Stunning new claims emerged today from palace insiders, revealing that King Charles's cancer is untreatable and he will likely pass away from the illness. The royal residence did not tremble from screaming. It fractured under a heavy, deafening silence. Just 5 minutes after confidential confirmation arrived at the estate, Prince William and Catherine released the statement that absolutely no one wanted to hear. The sovereign's failing health had taken a devastating turn, forcing the royal family into urgent crisis talks regarding duty and survival. A quiet, personal medical alert instantly transformed into the tragic moment the entire British monarchy wept in public view. Before exploring what this crisis means for the family's future, subscribe now to ensure you stay informed on every development. William did not hurry to release the news. The prince stood there, staring down at a message with the terrifying power to tear his entire world apart. Catherine stayed right by his side, sensing his shallow breathing while remaining quiet enough to let him process the initial shock. Senior royal responsibilities, the official public duties carried out on behalf of the monarch, faced an immediate and thorough reevaluation. Those specific words held massive weight, signaling this went far beyond a mere medical update. It showed the institution was bracing for a sudden change in who would actually carry the crown's daily burdens. Watching closely, Catherine saw the prince scan the final line twice. His grip tightened on the document, then slowly released. Realizing that frustration could never erase the written truth, the king's physical absence from the drafting table hit those in the room harder than any spoken bad news. For decades, the monarch remained at the heart of such choices. Today, his absolute silence serves as deafening proof that something has fractured deep within the institution. This sealed medical update followed a highly classified briefing, a closed meeting where top doctors shared sensitive data before any official statement was drafted. A personal physician basically acts as a counselor, guiding state decisions whenever a sovereign's health compromises their public responsibilities. This detail was critical, proving the household had moved past vague rumors and gentle worries. Instead, they faced a stark, official warning serious enough to reach the young couple before anyone else arrived. When the prince finally set the document down, there was no anger, no shouting. His quiet composure made the situation even more heartbreaking. In that room, Catherine saw more than a future monarch. She saw a grieving son desperately hiding his pain from a watching world. The princess knew these tragic words would soon flash across every television screen and newsfeed worldwide. But she also remembered that the deepest pain belonged exclusively to their family. Strict orders swept through the residence with eerie speed, demanding total silence, no public denials, and absolutely no commentary until the prince made his move. Tight control was crucial. A single slip could destroy public confidence, while false hope might make the sad reality look like a cover-up. The crown needed control, the family wanted time, but the king's failing health stole both. Before the official release went live, William turned to his wife. Catherine offered no grand speech, simply providing her steady comfort, and that was all he required. He knew that the moment this announcement was made, their private grief would belong to the global stage. It would quickly absorb the monarchy, the general public, and every individual whose loyalty to the institution was about to be tested. The moment the statement was read, the crisis shifted from a father's health struggle to a brutal test of everyone around the throne. Deep inside the palace, this news broke hearts in different ways. For the prince, it revived a haunting childhood nightmare in his adult life. For Catherine, it meant standing as an immovable pillar while the very earth shifted beneath their fragile household. For Charles, it was a harsh reminder that not even a king can command time to stop. For Queen Camilla, it signaled a deep loneliness that no royal title could ever cure. William stared down, the paper seemingly heavier with each passing second. The prince was no longer observing the crisis simply as a grieving son. He now stood there as the direct heir, the one destined to assume the throne the moment the current king could no longer rule. This sudden health emergency dragged the future forward, arriving not with celebratory trumpets, but as an immense and heavy burden. The British crown demanded a steady leader, and the prince felt the heavy weight of every eye turning toward him. Catherine gently placed her hand over his, not to hold him back, but to anchor him before his own anxieties could pull him under. The princess decoded his silence long before he had to voice it. She recognized the sharp divide between royal obligation and raw human sorrow. She saw him choosing official words for the public while masking a deep, personal ache. Her composure was vital. If William faltered, the entire royal household would collapse. King Charles had issued just one final request before the statement was sent. The king wanted William and Catherine to break the news themselves, not a secretary, a palace aide, or some cold official voice. A palace aide is basically a trusted staffer who helps manage official royal duties and private instructions. This choice was crucial because the monarch wanted the future of the crown speaking as one. He needed strength, but also soft humanity. Camilla received the news separately, and the queen consort didn't reach for anyone. She sat frozen as the door clicked shut, her face white, hands still. Her grand title felt completely useless against the heavy loneliness creeping in. Camilla had stood by Charles through endless storms, but this time felt entirely different. There was no gossip here, no family drama. This was the king's failing health, forcing decisions nobody was ready to face. A senior aide quietly slipped a public engagement folder off Charles's desk. Public engagements are the official appearances and visits where royals represent the British crown in front of the public. That small move was significant because it whispered what everyone feared saying aloud: some events might never happen. William stared at the empty space on the desk. Catherine watched his expression instantly crumble. Camilla heard the silence behind the closed door and knew their old life had fractured. The public statement shook the household, but the deepest pain remained locked away. William knew. Catherine felt it, too. Charles had braced himself, while Camilla, left alone with the truth, realized this tragic confirmation was just the tip of the iceberg. To understand why this carried such devastating force, we have to look back at the exact moment everything changed. Every major royal crisis has a turning point that becomes impossible to ignore. This disaster started not with a public collapse or a headline, but during a private dinner at Windsor. During what should have been a peaceful family evening, Charles reached for his glass, stopped mid-conversation, and looked at William with an expression that turned the room silent. That was the moment nobody ever forgot. Charles had walked into that dinner absolutely determined to maintain control. The king had wanted a single quiet evening, one calm discussion, a chance to talk about upcoming duties without sparking panic in the household. Future royal duties are simply the public tasks, state visits, and formal ceremonies that keep the crown visible to the world. And that was vital, because those duties were far more than mere calendar dates. They served as living proof that the king was still strong enough to rule. William caught the shift before anyone else did. He was listening to Charles discuss scheduling, when suddenly the monarch's voice went weak. Catherine looked across the table and saw his knuckles turn white on the wood, as if sheer pride was keeping him upright. The princess did not speak. She didn't want to cause panic, but she knew right then this wasn't just exhaustion. This was a physical warning to the crown. Still, Charles tried pushing through. He pushed out one more sentence, then went silent again, and that second pause held more terror than any confession ever could. William stood up, scraping his chair back, not in a panic, but loud enough to draw every eye in the room. The noise echoed sharply. For a second, the room felt cold, and the next leader was suddenly standing in his father's place. Catherine watched it happen, realizing the future king had just shifted from a worried son to a leader in command. Dinner was over. No explanations were given. No official statements came to soften the blow. Once Charles retired to his quarters, a confidential medical review was ordered, essentially a top-level assessment by doctors to see what duties the king could still manage. This step was massive, shifting the crisis from a family secret into structured, official planning. The palace was no longer asking if something was wrong, but rather how much they could keep hidden from the world. Catherine later came across William in a quiet hallway, staring blankly at his father's closed door. He stayed silent at first, just standing there with the crushing realization that his father's illness could reshape the entire country. The princess stood close, and her quiet presence showed she understood exactly what they were both facing. They both knew there was no going back. Behind closed doors, Charles's inner circle started drafting a scaled-back work plan without alerting the rest of the staff. This strategy allowed certain duties to be handed off to other royals to shield the king's failing health. This mattered because every single reassigned task whispered the exact same truth. The king was not nearly as strong as the public had been led to believe. That dinner revealed their deepest fears, but the clash that followed exposed fractures they could no longer hide. The institution had survived scandals, rifts, and national storms before, but nothing compared to the tense, private confrontation that broke out after Charles's diagnosis was confirmed. No cameras, no carefully chosen balcony smiles, no polished statement to protect them, just William, Catherine, Camilla, and Charles in one room, with the truth laying between them like a blade. Camilla demanded answers before anyone else could settle the room. The queen consort wanted to know why she had been shut out from shaping the wording of the official announcement, why William and Catherine had spoken first, and why the king's diagnosis had been shared with such brutal, painful honesty. This official statement confirming the king's serious decline mattered because it did far more than just explain his failing health. It shifted the balance of power inside the palace. Charles sat beside a small table, present but clearly exhausted by the weight of the moment. The king remained silent at first. He watched Camilla speak, then looked at William standing by the door, guarding both his father and the crown's future. The prince understood the stakes of this room. If the family fractured here, the public would feel the tremors. If truth became a weapon, the monarchy would bleed from within. Camilla insisted the announcement made Charles look weak. Her voice trembled with fear, but it felt like a sharp accusation. William replied with quiet fury. He told the queen consort that burying the truth would make them look cruel, and cruelty would damage the crown far more than honesty. Catherine watched his jaw tighten. She saw Camilla's expression harden, realizing that grief was rapidly turning into bitter blame. Catherine stepped in before the argument shattered the room. The princess did not raise her voice, but her raw emotion cut through the tension. She reminded them all that Charles was sitting right there, still listening, a human being beneath the heavy title. The crown had already demanded too much of the king's failing strength. They could not now force him to watch his own family battle over his fragility. Charles finally spoke a moment later, detailed in a private account recorded by a senior household aide. The king revealed that he had personally approved William and Catherine's lead role in the announcement. He trusted his heirs to shield both the royal family and the public trust. The crown, and the heavy duty tied to it, required a single, steady voice. In that quiet moment, the king made clear who would carry that voice. Yet William did not look victorious. The prince looked absolutely devastated. Catherine stayed close, knowing this was no victory. It was a wound. And Camilla was about to hear a second, harder truth. Several royal duties had already been evaluated, with major responsibilities set to shift to William much sooner than planned. The queen consort froze. That was the one reality no one had dared to voice out loud. Charles lowered his eyes, shifting the room's energy. The king had not just offered trust, he had sanctioned a transition. Camilla saw it clearly. Catherine felt the weight. William prepared to carry it. Suddenly, this crisis was no longer just about sickness or family grief. This realization shifted everything from raw emotion to raw control. And control is where the palace becomes most dangerous. Power in the monarchy rarely arrives with a thunderclap. It moves through paperwork, quiet signatures, and who is summoned to the room first. After that tragic diagnosis, one truth was impossible to ignore. William was no longer waiting on the sidelines of history. He was being pulled into it. And Catherine, steady despite her inner dread, became the one helping him bear what Charles could no longer carry. William stared at the open dispatch folder, unable to turn the page. The prince knew exactly what those files represented. This transition folder held the upcoming schedules, public visits, and official tasks of the firm. It was far more than simple paperwork. Every single page marked a place where the king would no longer stand. And every new line pushed the heir closer to a role he never wished to inherit under such shadow. Catherine watched him wrestle with the silence, knowing that taking charge might look like a display of power to outsiders. But to the family, it felt like grief dressed in uniform. She quietly reminded William that protecting his father did not mean replacing him. It meant giving the king grace to define his own strength. Her quiet guidance was crucial, as the palace desperately searched for stability. But the prince needed room to be a son before becoming a symbol. The king's reduced schedule was no longer seen as a brief pause. His condition forced a massive constitutional and emotional shift. In plain terms, constitutional meant a direct impact on how the crown operated within the state. This was critical because Charles was not merely a father fighting to recover. He was the reigning king, and every cancelled appearance triggered questions of succession. A palace aide slipped in carrying a drafted list from Charles's private office. Internal household documents would later show the king had quietly penned William's name next to major engagements, long before the public announcement. The king had recognized his own decline far earlier than those around him. This was not carelessness. He had been preparing all along. That revelation struck the prince harder than any royal command. It proved his father was planning for the future while quietly masking his current pain. William turned to Catherine and finally confessed the heavy truth he had carried all morning. He admitted he never wanted this day to come at such a painful cost. The princess did not offer him empty words of comfort. She gently reminded him that Charles still held his dignity, his choices, and a son strong enough to protect them both. The future king heard her, yet the heavy burden did not lift. It only settled deeper. Camilla noticed the shift when a decision that once reached her first went straight to William's office instead. The queen consort froze upon learning that key instructions now required the prince's personal review before they could be finalized. Camilla had braced for grief and prepared for illness. But this sudden shift in power felt like a different kind of loss. She realized just how quickly a crisis could completely rearrange the world around her. Charles remained at the center, yet the royal machinery was now turning around William. Catherine saw it, Camilla felt it, and the prince could no longer pretend it was temporary. Power had not announced itself with a crown or a dramatic speech. It arrived through rescheduled meetings, guarded words, and a father quietly preparing his son before his time had truly come. By the following morning, the palace had stopped asking what happened. They were already reacting to changes that could not be undone. Dawn broke, but the palace did not feel awake. It felt wounded. The news of Charles's failing health had spread faster than any official could contain. Inside the royal household, every corridor seemed to echo with a different kind of fear. Staff whispered quietly over rescheduled plans. Aides quietly removed names from official briefing papers, and Camilla, standing alone by a window, realized the old rhythm was permanently broken. Camilla watched an aide remove Charles's next engagement card from the schedule board. The queen consort did not tell him to stop. She simply stared as the card disappeared, her expression slowly shifting from disbelief to quiet grief. An engagement card represents a scheduled official royal appearance. Removing it meant the king would likely miss his planned events. This mattered because Charles's absence could not be hidden within palace walls. Every empty seat would speak volumes. William received the first call before the household had even settled. He paused before answering. Every ring now felt like a test, not just support. A senior courtier, an experienced official trusted with key royal decisions, explained that emergency schedule changes had already begun. This mattered because the family was no longer simply waiting to see what would happen next. The palace was already shifting around the king's growing weakness. Catherine stood close enough to hear William's brief, clipped replies. She knew his short answers were not born of coldness, they were pure control. She understood he was being called to step into a much larger public role. It was not for honor or ceremony, but a vital response to Charles's failing health. The future king was being forced forward, even while trying desperately to remain just a son. Catherine recognized the pain of that division before anyone else. Meanwhile, Charles's reduced schedule triggered urgent, private calls to senior royals. The king had not vanished from the center of power, but his worsening condition forced others to act before the public saw the full reality of the crisis. This mattered because the monarchy survives on continuity, and continuity means the crown must look perfectly steady, even when the family behind it is completely shaken. William knew this. Catherine knew this too. Camilla felt it most sharply as another folder was removed from Charles's desk. Meanwhile, the palace quietly drafted two separate public statements. One draft offered hope, while the other was far more severe. A public statement represents the official message released to the nation, ensuring the royal household maintains a single, controlled version of events. This mattered because two separate drafts meant deep uncertainty. No one could fully promise reassurance anymore. It meant their next official words would either calm the nation or deepen the public's anxiety. Catherine learned from a private briefing note that Charles had specifically requested she stay by William's side during all upcoming meetings. The princess quietly processed that request, but it struck her deeply. The king was not just trusting his son. He was counting on her to steady him when the crown became too heavy. William looked at Catherine when she shared the news, and in that moment, royal titles vanished. Only the shared fear between them remained. Camilla stood alone once more after the aide left. The queen consort realized that their grief was now visible through these sudden, desperate actions. Cards gone, calls made, drafts prepared. William listened to the next order and stood frozen, unable to move immediately. Catherine watched him quietly gather his strength. Behind a closed door, Charles waited, holding words that only a father could tell his son. As William finally stepped into Charles's room without any aides, the crisis became painfully simple. A king, his heir, and the words both dreaded to speak. Behind all the heavy palace doors, grand titles, and polished protocols, the real turning point happened in a quiet room where status vanished. Charles was no longer a symbol. William was not just the heir. They sat simply as father and son, close enough for quiet silence to speak what stubborn pride never could. Catherine waited in the hallway, and for once the British monarchy stood completely defenseless against raw grief and truth. William walked in alone at Charles's request. The prince left Catherine behind the closed door, even though his entire soul craved her steadying presence beside him. A private royal room is a sanctuary where the family speaks without interference from palace staff, political advisors, or heavy public pressure. This mattered because political strategy no longer played any part. This was a father admitting his deepest fears to his son. Charles looked at William with a rare, raw softness the royal court seldom saw. The king recognized the announcement shifted everything, knowing his son, the future monarch, had already absorbed the first public shockwaves. The British royal family had to adapt to a painful new reality. It meant preparing the institution for reduced royal duties, shifted roles, and far heavier responsibilities resting on the young heir. No one could pretend this was just a stressful week. It was the solemn beginning of a new chapter born of heartbreak. Charles offered his son an apology, not for falling ill, but because this heavy burden had arrived through sudden terror rather than through a calm, planned transition. The prince bowed his head in quiet reflection before replying that he harbored no anger toward the crown's heavy weight. His true fear was losing his father to the crown. Those words shattered generations of stiff royal distance. In that moment, the crown dissolved entirely, leaving only love under immense pressure. Charles quietly reached for his son's hand. It was a tiny gesture, yet it carried decades of unspoken feelings they had never managed to say aloud. The king had dedicated his lifetime to relentless duty, while the prince learned early how crushing silence can be. Now, the raw truth lay between them. Charles remained the sovereign, but he was also a vulnerable father, pleading with his son to show strength before either felt ready. Recorded family chats, later archived in confidential palace notes, reveal why Charles specifically chose the Prince and Princess of Wales to share the somber news. The king desired the public to witness royal continuity wrapped in genuine compassion. Continuity ensures the throne appears unshaken when a member steps away, providing the vital calm and stability the public desperately needed. Yet, Charles also insisted on transparency. He wanted the kingdom to glimpse its future without feeling deserted by its current sovereign. William listened in silence, fully realizing Catherine was selected not as a superficial symbol, but as an anchor of true strength. The king relied on her poise, her sound judgment, and her unique ability to steady the future monarch when grief threatened to spiral. The king also made one thing absolutely clear. Queen Camilla needed protection from public scrutiny, but she could not dictate the narrative. The queen consort's deep sorrow was recognized, nonetheless. Still, public truth outweighed administrative comfort. As their meeting drew to a close, William stood up slowly, looking heavily burdened rather than relieved. He seemed deeply changed. Charles watched him walk away with mixed pride and sorrow, realizing the frightened boy who entered was leaving as a resolute leader. The moment the door swung open, Catherine read his face. She knew everything before he uttered a single word. Their intimate grief was out, but beyond the palace walls, the public was already dissecting its meaning. By noon, the historic news could no longer be kept behind palace gates. It swept into households, offices, coffee shops, and busy streets, forcing citizens to freeze mid-scroll and stare blankly at their screens. The somber confirmation regarding King Charles's medical condition transcended simple royal news, prompting a collective, national moment of silence. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered not to celebrate, but in quiet recognition that an entire royal era was shifting beneath their feet. William watched the initial public reactions unfold on a silent screen, standing motionless as the reality of his future sank in. The announcement captured global attention because he and Catherine chose not to hide behind cold, bureaucratic press releases. They delivered the hard truth personally. A royal update, quite simply, is a formal announcement concerning critical developments within the reigning family or the British throne. This was crucial because the message did not address royal tours, ceremonial events, or celebrations. It focused entirely on the king's failing health and the future of the monarchy. Catherine stood close to William, while news channels broadcast his emotional statement on a continuous loop. The princess watched commentators describe this as the ultimate test of the monarchy, highlighting William's poise and her own serene dignity beside him. This was key because people were no longer just processing the diagnosis. They were assessing who was prepared to carry the royal burden. Catherine recognized that her quiet grace had become part of the narrative as anxious crowds began assembling near the palace gates. a well-wisher laid a lone white rose near the gates, softly murmuring that King Charles had seemed weary for far too long. For those who may not know, Buckingham Palace is the monarchy's most recognized working home, the ultimate symbol of royal life. And that mattered, because people did not gather there by accident. They came because the king's failing health humanized the crown. Prince William watched the scene and quietly turned away. The prince was not ashamed of his grief. He was shaken because strangers witnessed what he had fought to keep private since that Windsor dinner. Catherine noticed his reaction and stayed close, refusing to break the heavy silence. She knew the future king could face a nation, but facing a country's sorrow for his father was something else entirely. A grim newspaper headline suddenly appeared on the front page, announcing that the king steps back, and that William and Catherine would lead the nation through pain. Those heavy words landed hard across the palace, because they made the shift feel official before any decisions were announced. The front page of a newspaper is the main spotlight, the exact place where the most critical stories are displayed for everyone to see. That mattered immensely, because the public had already chosen the singular image that would define the day. One broadcaster observed that the truly defining image was not a crown, not a royal balcony, nor a golden carriage, but Catherine standing beside William as he spoke the hardest truth of his life. When the princess heard that line in a recorded briefing, it deeply unsettled her. She never intended to become a symbol. She had stood there because the prince needed her, because King Charles trusted her, and because the country demanded calm. Camilla heard the public reaction from another room, and the queen consort understood that the nation was already shifting toward William and Catherine. She felt the painful sting of it, yet she knew precisely why it was happening. Charles's illness had triggered fear, and fear desperately searches for steadiness. The king had chosen exactly where that steadiness would come from. While the world watched in shock, the final judgment belonged to those who lived this deep heartbreak from within the crown itself. In the end, the tragic confirmation of King Charles's failing health did not destroy the monarchy. It stripped it completely bare, revealing the fear beneath the ceremony, the love beneath the duty, and the heavy toll of a crown passed through sorrow rather than celebration. William and Catherine did not simply deliver the news. They guided a wounded family through its most vulnerable hour, redefining leadership forever, while Charles accepted his reduced role with quiet, solemn dignity. The king laid down his pen after signing the revised duty plan, gazing at William with quiet pride instead of defeat. A revised duty plan meant a restructured list of royal duties, designed to preserve the king's health while stabilizing the crown. This mattered because it was not a surrender. It was a father choosing truth over stubborn pride, and a king choosing the future over outward appearances. William did not smile when Charles looked his way. The prince understood the heavy weight of that glance. Succession, simply put, is the order of who carries the crown next, when the monarch can no longer do so. And that mattered because the public had stopped viewing it as merely a distant tradition. They now saw a living burden borne by real people, with real fear, real grief, and real love hiding behind every grand title. Catherine stood beside William afterward, never speaking for him or overshadowing the moment, but quietly giving him the strength to stay steady when his grief threatened to surface. The princess had become far more than just a calm presence. She was now the quiet force helping the future king stand, when his family's private sorrow transformed into a historic national turning point. William knew it, Charles knew it, and the palace felt it. Yet Camilla's heartbreak was still deeply real. The queen consort had lost the steady rhythm she once shared with Charles, watching decisions pivot toward William and Catherine faster than her heart could ever accept. But Camilla finally came to understand the hardest truth. Shielding the king meant embracing the future he had personally entrusted to them. Her grief remained, but she finally stopped fighting the truth. Charles had emotionally prepared for this transition before anyone else fully understood it. Through private accounts carefully documented in palace notes, the king's true motive became clear. He chose open compassion over cold secrecy during his most painful trial, refusing to let the monarchy hide behind polished words. He wanted the country to see honesty, steadiness, and family strength united. William carried that honesty, and Catherine gave it grace. Charles gave it his permission, and Camilla, wounded but no longer resisting, accepted that love sometimes requires letting go of control. This was not simply a tragic announcement about a king's failing health. This was the exact moment William and Catherine stepped up as the crown's emotional guardians. Leaving no doubt behind, Charles had given the monarchy honesty. William brought steadiness, Catherine added grace, and together they transformed a season of sorrow into a solemn passage of strength. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.